The buffalo calf was born during the coldest night of January. By sunrise, everyone at the farm had seen her, and everyone had the same reaction. That's not normal. Mara Whitaker stood inside the drafty cattle shed, staring at the newborn calf curled against the straw. Her coat wasn't brown. It wasn't black. It was almost completely white, cream-colored around the ears, pinkish skin around the muzzle, pale lashes, and startling blue-gray eyes. Mara's 8-year-old daughter, Lily, whispered, "She's beautiful." Mara smiled. "She is." But outside the barn, the reaction was different. Her neighbor Earl Dawson leaned over the fence. "That calf won't be worth much." Mara turned. "Why? Nobody wants a buffalo that looks like that." Mara glanced back at the calf. "She's healthy." Earl shrugged. "Doesn't matter." He walked away. Mara didn't argue. She had heard enough opinions about her farm already. She was a single mother raising 2 children on a struggling 70-acre property. Money was tight. The cattle operation barely covered expenses. And now she had a calf everyone considered unusual. But Mara had learned something over the years. People often confused different with worthless. She named the calf Pearl. Pearl was smaller than the other calves, but surprisingly energetic. She stood within minutes of being born. She nursed normally. She followed Mara's older cows around the pasture. Within a week, she was racing across the field with the other calves. There was nothing fragile about her. If anything, Pearl was stubborn. When the other calves moved toward the water trough, Pearl pushed through the middle. When they ran toward the barn, she ran faster. Lily adored her. Every morning before school, she stopped at the fence. "Morning, Pearl." Pearl would lift her head. Mara laughed. "She knows you." She better. The jokes continued. At the feed store, someone asked Mara, "Still keeping that white buffalo?" Mara nodded. "She's doing well." "You planning to sell her?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I don't need to." The man laughed. "You're sentimental." Mara smiled. "Maybe, but there was another reason." Mara had begun researching Pearl's unusual coloring. She contacted a livestock genetics specialist at the University of Missouri. The specialist asked for photographs, then veterinary records, then a hair sample. A week later, she called Mara. "Pearl is healthy." Mara relaxed. "But there's something interesting." "What?" "Her coloration appears to be the result of a rare inherited trait." Mara looked toward the pasture. "How rare?" "Rare enough that I'd recommend documenting everything." That sentence changed Mara's approach. She began keeping detailed records. Pearl's weight, growth rate, health history, vaccinations, parentage. Every photograph was dated. Mara didn't know whether Pearl would ever have commercial value. She simply wanted accurate information. Then the university asked whether they could include Pearl in a broader genetic study. Mara agreed. A research team visited the farm. They examined Pearl without disturbing her. The results were surprising. Pearl wasn't simply a pale version of an ordinary buffalo. Her unusual coloration was connected to a rare genetic combination. More importantly, her lineage could be traced through several generations of healthy animals. That meant something. Potentially quite a lot. Mara kept the findings private. She didn't want strangers showing up at her farm. But secrets don't stay secret for long. A photograph of Pearl appeared in a regional livestock discussion group. Someone shared it. Then someone else. Within days, the image had traveled far beyond Missouri. Comments poured in. Some people thought Pearl was fake. Others claimed she was sick. A few called her a genetic accident. But one comment came from someone who understood what they were looking at. "Find out who owns this animal." Mara didn't see the comment. She was too busy repairing a broken section of fence. The first phone call came on a Tuesday. "Is this Mara Whitaker?" "Yes." "My name is Daniel Price. I'm calling about your young buffalo." Mara immediately became cautious. "Which buffalo?" "The pale female." Mara looked through the kitchen window. Pearl was standing beneath an oak tree. "Why?" "We represent a private conservation foundation." Mara frowned. "How did you get my number?" "We found your farm through public livestock records." Mara didn't like that. "What do you want?" "We'd like to discuss Pearl." "I'm not selling her." There was a pause. "We're not necessarily calling to buy her." Mara waited. "We'd like to see her." "No." The answer came immediately. "Why?" "Because I don't know you." The caller laughed softly. "Fair enough." Mara hung up. 2 days later, another call came. Then another. One caller represented a wildlife genetics organization. Another worked with a private breeding program. Another wanted to purchase genetic material. Mara rejected every offer. She wasn't interested in turning Pearl into a commodity. Then Professor Laura Jensen called. Mara trusted her. Laura, what's going on? You've created quite a bit of interest. I noticed. Laura sighed. Pearl may be more important than we initially thought. Mara looked toward the pasture. How? Her genetics. Tell me. Laura explained that rare coloration itself wasn't necessarily the valuable part. What mattered was the combination of lineage, health, fertility potential, and genetic diversity. If Pearl carried a rare trait without significant health problems, researchers and conservation programs could have legitimate reasons to study her. Mara frowned. So people want access to her genetics. Some do, and others. Some simply want to own something rare. Mara looked uncomfortable. That's exactly what I don't want. I know. Laura paused. That's why you need to be careful. 3 months later, Pearl was no longer a fragile calf. She had grown into a striking young buffalo. Her pale coat gleamed in the sunlight. Her body was strong. Her temperament was calm but independent. And she had become the most photographed animal on Mara's farm. Then the first black SUV arrived. Mara was repairing a gate when she heard tires on gravel. A glossy black SUV stopped outside the farmhouse. Then another. Then a third. Mara froze. Lily ran onto the porch. Mom. Mara stared at the vehicles. The doors opened. Well-dressed strangers stepped out carrying folders and equipment cases. One of them looked toward the pasture. Then toward Mara. Ms. Whitaker? Mara didn't move. Who are you? The man smiled. We've come from 3 different organizations. He glanced toward Pearl. And apparently, we all want to talk to you. Mara looked at the 3 SUVs filling her driveway. For the first time, she realized the people who had laughed at Pearl's strange appearance had completely misunderstood what they were seeing. Pearl wasn't worthless. But Mara still had no idea just how valuable and controversial the young buffalo's rare genetics were about to become. The 3 black SUVs sat in Mara's driveway. Lily stood behind her mother, watching the strangers. Mara didn't move. You're going to have to explain why you're here. The man who had spoken stepped forward. My name is Daniel Price. We spoke on the phone. Mara recognized him. You said you weren't necessarily trying to buy Pearl. We aren't. He gestured toward the other 2 vehicles. The people with me represent a conservation foundation, a university genetics program, and a private heritage breeding organization. Mara crossed her arms. And all 3 want the same thing. Access to Pearl's genetics. Mara glanced toward the pasture. Pearl was grazing peacefully. She's not a product. Daniel nodded. We understand. Do you? He paused. That's why we came in person. Professor Laura Jensen arrived shortly afterward. She walked into the farmhouse carrying a folder. Mara looked relieved. Tell me what's happening. Laura placed several documents on the kitchen table. Pearl's genetic profile is unusual. Mara had heard that before. How unusual? Extremely. Laura explained that Pearl carried a rare coloration trait, but the bigger discovery was in her broader genetic profile. Several markers suggested unusually high genetic diversity within her lineage. That mattered. A rare animal wasn't necessarily valuable simply because it looked different. But a healthy animal carrying uncommon genetic material could be important to carefully managed breeding and conservation programs. Mara frowned. So everyone wants her because she's rare. Partly. What's the other part? Laura looked at her. Because she's healthy. That distinction changed everything. Pearl wasn't a sick animal with unusual coloring. She was a healthy young buffalo carrying a rare combination of genetic traits. That made her scientifically interesting. It also made her commercially attractive. The private breeding organization offered Mara a substantial amount of money. Mara refused. They increased the offer. She refused again. The Conservation Foundation offered funding for Pearl's long-term care. That interested her. But Mara wanted conditions. No transfer of ownership. The foundation agreed. No breeding decisions without veterinary oversight. Agreed. No selling genetic material to third parties without my approval. The representative hesitated. Then agreed. Mara nodded. Now we're talking. The university proposed something different. They wanted Pearl included in a long-term genetics study. Mara agreed. Pearl would remain on the farm. Researchers could collect samples periodically. All results would be shared with Mara, and any future breeding recommendations would prioritize animal health. For the first time, Mara felt comfortable. She wasn't selling Pearl. She was protecting her. The story eventually reached the local newspaper. The headline called Pearl a rare white buffalo. People from neighboring counties started visiting. Some wanted photographs. Others wanted to see her in person. Mara refused to turn the farm into a tourist attraction. She built a viewing area away from the pasture. Visitors could observe Pearl without entering her space. The farm charged a small conservation fee. The money helped pay for fencing, veterinary care, and habitat improvements. Something unexpected happened. Pearl began helping the farm financially without ever being sold. The biggest surprise came months later. Researchers discovered that Pearl's maternal line had been nearly lost. Her grandmother had been one of only a handful of animals carrying the same unusual genetic markers. That meant Pearl wasn't simply rare. She represented a surviving branch of a nearly forgotten bloodline. Laura showed Mara the genetic chart. Mara stared at it. How close were we to losing this? Laura answered quietly. Very. Mara looked through the window toward Pearl. The cow was standing beneath the oak tree, calm, unaware of the argument her existence had caused. The private organization returned with another proposal. This time, they weren't asking to buy Pearl. They wanted to collaborate. They offered to fund a carefully managed breeding program while Pearl remained on Mara's farm. Mara considered the proposal for weeks. Eventually, she agreed, but only under strict conditions. Pearl's welfare came first. No forced breeding, no excessive handling, no unnecessary transport, no commercial exploitation of her offspring, and complete transparency about the genetic program. The organization signed. Laura oversaw the veterinary side. Mara remained Pearl's owner. A year later, Pearl had grown into a magnificent adult buffalo. Her coat was still almost completely white. Her blue-gray eyes remained distinctive. But what impressed visitors most was her health. She was strong, calm, and thriving. The same people who once laughed at her appearance now spoke about her with respect. Earl Dawson visited one afternoon. He stood at the fence watching Pearl. She's worth more than I ever imagined. Mara smiled. That's not why she's here. Earl nodded. I know. He looked at Mara. You know what surprises me? What? Nobody saw it. Mara glanced at Pearl. They saw the color. Earl smiled. You saw the animal. Eventually, Pearl became part of a carefully managed conservation breeding program. Her genetic material helped researchers understand a rare lineage. Her offspring were monitored closely, and Mara's farm became a small but respected center for responsible livestock genetics. The black SUVs stopped arriving unexpectedly. Instead, researchers scheduled visits. Veterinarians came regularly. Contracts were reviewed carefully. Everything became professional. But Mara kept one rule unchanged. Pearl was never treated like an object. She was an animal first. One evening, Mara sat on the fence with Lily. Pearl grazed nearby. Lily looked at her mother. Remember when everybody said she was worthless? Mara laughed softly. I remember. What made you keep her? Mara thought for a moment. I didn't know she was valuable. Lily frowned. Then why? Mara watched Pearl lift her head in the fading sunlight. Because she was healthy. She smiled. And because I didn't think being different was a reason to throw something away. The story spread far beyond Mercy Creek. But Mara never became famous because she owned a rare buffalo. She became known because she refused to let rarity turn into exploitation. Pearl's value wasn't simply her white coat. It was the genetic history she carried, the healthy lineage behind it, and the possibility that her genetics could help preserve something that had nearly disappeared. The black SUVs had arrived because powerful people wanted access to something rare. They left with something different, a partnership built around protecting it. And the farmers who once laughed at Mara eventually understood the real lesson. Pearl hadn't become valuable because someone finally offered enough money. She had always been valuable. The world simply hadn't known what it was looking at. Mara looked across the pasture one final time as Pearl stood beneath the oak tree. She smiled. Still think she's worthless? Earl laughed from the fence. Not a chance.